that branch off and ruin that view. Then the design intent's has been completely eliminated. Same with that tree. That straight tree's there for a reason. When the cars drive by, it's like a picture frame. So you're looking underneath the canopy of that tree, and it frames the view of the house. Okay. Let's walk over. Let's go walking over to that gray truck. Come down the street. This is the first view of the house right here. This is called the primary view. So the goal of this view is to de-emphasize the garage. So we got those two service berries placed like that to interrupt that giant welcome to my garage feeling. And then it turns the view towards the front door. So we got the Japanese white pine here, framing one side. Got that Kodo no Ito Japanese maple highlighting the front door. So I got a clear shot of the front door. The hedge was planted in a rising, undulating fashion to give some rhythm and movement to the front. Okay, so it's 8 inches higher than grade. So going from low to high. So that's the design intent, and that gives structure. It's like the spine of the landscape, so to speak. So if that's neatly maintained, all these wilder looking plantings provide that nice contrast that we're looking for. So I don't want to ruin that when I'm pruning. I would say it's the one that is most, it's probably that first initial view of boom, and that usually happens right where the truck is. So as soon as you come around that corner, I'm going to catch this view, and then as I turn down the street, I'm looking at the Sharabas next door. So I got that one brief moment. Now if the street was perpendicular to the house and you're driving by the house,
you'd have 2 points.
It's kind of like right in the, almost
or
like
in the center.
You have one, and then one in the middle, and then as you're passing, not so much. It's usually 2.
Okay.
So, and again, we talked. Some of the guys weren't here. We were talking about that birch tree. I try and keep that limbed up, so when you guys are mowing Brian's house here, you're not smacking your head on the branches. But I don't want to limb that up so high, because from my driveway looking over, I'm looking at the blank side of his house.
That was another thing that sometimes I have a hard time figuring out if I should make the plant or tree look good from the road looking at the house, or if I want the customer in their house looking out at their landscaping to see like what when you're facing plants and stuff like that.
Yeah, I make the same mistake actually.
What's the?
It depends on the homeowner, but
Just
typically most people want it looking good from the street.
Yeah.
In the backyard, and when the view is reversed and you're looking out into the backyard, it's the reverse of that. So
yeah, so it's from the house.
Yeah. So I would probably do the public view first, unless it's some freak yard like this.
Yeah.
The homeowner has very specific things, you know.
Just in general.
Yeah. So, all right. Any questions on design intent?
Do you have pictures when you first did it? Oh yeah, that was just cool to look at.
We're doing a free webinar. Western Reserve Land Conservancy is doing one, and we're going to talk about like transitioning some of our typical ornamental plants more to the native side of things. And I got some before and afters that are pretty. It's like, oh, when you first start, it never looks like this. It's very dramatic. 20 years is a long time for a landscape, and that's the other thing you guys need to keep in the back of your mind. It's not about getting through the day to make a buck. This client, any client, spent tens of thousands typically on landscape. So that's an investment for them. They want that to be good. Yeah. So if you guys come in and screw it all up, that's like taking a hammer to your car. It's like, why would you do that? So that's why we're doing this today. So the skill level that you guys have, you feel confident when you're looking at some of this stuff. Okay, that's about all. Anything else? Okay, before we jump into this here, real quick. Plants have shapes, okay? Not all plants are meant to be shoved into a ball. We're not trying to make basketballs and Parcheesi pieces by shearing everything into a ball. So every plant has a natural form. And probably the most basic is just to do something like this, where you have plants that want to grow into a pyramid. Could be boxwood, pyramidal boxwood. Taxus, some of the taxus are pyramidal. We have columnar plants, usually like a
Sky pencil.
arborvitae,
I was gonna say arbor.
sky pencil, yeah, something like that. Rounded, that would be typically like a boxwood. Or that dwarf white pine right there is a rounded form. Oval, some plants are oval. Weeping, weeping Jap maples, weeping Norway spruce, have a particular form. If you wanna accent that when you're pruning, you don't want to decimate it. Horizontal, there's a couple of those taxus right there called everlow. That's what they do. They get this tall and they grow horizontal.
Would that be like a creeping juniper too?
That would be prostrate.
Oh,
That's
different.
kind of hugging the ground and growing and clambering across the ground. You have vase-shaped, upright vase-shaped, which is this kind of form. The burning bush, believe it or not, is that type of form. Most of the viburnums have that upright. They're kind of the branch structure on the bottom then goes up like this.
Have you seen the people that take their burning bushes and they limb it up and then leave it like
Make it into
puff?
like a little tree.
Is that good or not good or indifferent?
If it makes them happy.
Yeah. It kind of looked cool when I saw it.
It's
So.
topiary work.
Yeah, topiary work.
So.
Okay, so we talked about plant form, right? So the first type of pruning is basically called grooming or cleaning. So if this is the edge of the sidewalk, so I can walk by without jabbing my eye into a branch. If it did, that would be the first thing to go. I'm also looking initially, I'm looking at the overall shape of the plant. Does anything about this plant jump out to you as maybe needing attention? So before you even get out your pruning chair, your clippers, take a look around. You got to walk around the plant. And we talked about the view, so this is our first view. It looks different from where you're standing than it does over here. So we got this wild hair right there, and then maybe some of this gets knocked back. And what we're looking for is dead branches, cross branches, sucker growth, stuff like that. So really the only thing within this, this is like a kind of an inward growing branch. I'd probably just snip that off. The only other like bad, I would consider a bad thing, might be some of this right here. We already have the canopy up on top, which is shading this. This is probably not going to last much longer. So we can go ahead and prune that out.
What section were you talking about?
So here, it's called a water sprout. We'll look at it on a pear tree over here. It'll be a little more obvious.
So this right here?
Yep, take that out. And then probably some of this right here. There you go. So when we're cleaning or grooming a plant, we're talking about 10%. 10% of the plant. If it's summertime and we do more than that, the plant's going to respond with a bunch of vigorous growth, which completely eliminates the reason why you just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. This is probably the best example of what we can talk about as far as a branch collar. It's not always obvious, but this swelling of the bark right here is called the branch collar. So if I wanted to take this branch off, I am not gonna, first of all, use the right tool.
This is the wrong tool.
That's the right tool. So I'm not gonna cut it off because I don't want to cut it off. But so right here,
So undercut first.
I am not gonna take loppers or undersized tools like this and try and cut that off because I'm too lazy to walk to the truck to get my saw. So the first thing we do is grab the right tool. So because of the size of the branch, I'm going to make one undercut here and a second cut here to take the weight of the branch off the cut. If I just try and cut it right here, the weight of the branch is going to come down and it's going to tear that bark right off that collar. So, first cut underneath, second cut on top, and then your third cut is don't want to touch the branch collar. That's the healing mechanism for the plant. So it's important to remember that that wound is not going to heal. The wound is going to seal. So that tissue that's around that that cut you just made is going to grow over and seal the wound. So most research now is saying not to paint the wound, not to spray it with anything. Just make the cut and let the branch collar do the work. We don't want to do this and leave a stub, because rot enters through the branch and then gets into the trunk. And it looks ugly. It looks amateur and unprofessional. So.
You could probably look at some of the old healed ones right above that, where you left just
on this branch here, there's a perfect example right here, where the garbage truck comes through, and I trimmed off this stuff because it was smacking the truck. But you can see how that wound right there is grown over and completely sealed that. So that's like the perfect cut right there. Okay. As you're looking at this tree, is there anything else that you would do to it? We talked about safety.
Yeah.
The mowing guys can get underneath. Pedestrians, unless you're 10 feet tall, you can walk underneath the tree without issue. But no, this one, starting to cross.
closer to the top. Your first cut supposed to.
No, I know, but this one's not that heavy. It's like, you're not going to peel this. Or you could make your first cut right here, right underneath that branch collar. Just like that. And then go in from the top. Or you can use two hands, grab the other branch with one hand.
In this particular case, is it worth it? Up higher, you can see a bunch of littler ones that are starting to wrap around branches that are kind of developed. Would it make sense to get up in there, or are those too small? Or
You know,
concerned with at this moment?
Get that next
tree?
if you're completely anal about it, and the client, if we sold the client on Dormant pruning this tree,
Yeah.
I would absolutely do that.
Okay.
And then do that with extension snip. Or full pruning.
But you can just hear they're already starting to kind of like try to wrap around. Yeah.
Or you can climb the tree. You gotta be careful. Something this small, you gotta be breaking branches on it. It's usually better for the ground.
I don't think we generally sell over about 15, 20 feet, so generally probably wouldn't find much.
Cool.
Generally, it's
There you go.
Wanna get that last one?
Might as well get that last one.
We're nothing about 20.
Take that big branch and smash that white car with it.
I will. That's Darius. Yep, it is Darius. Is that a better cut than the one I gave you up here?
Yeah, it's a little bit. Okay. Is that a stub? Yeah, you got an angled cut on that?
Why?
So, come back to this side so you can look at it. When he cut that, he made an angled cut, so he's leaving the stub. The saw blade has to be perpendicular. If you start cutting at an angle, you're gonna leave a stub. Like square it off.
So even that one he just did, where it's, I can see what you're talking about, but it's not crazy. It's still going in like a lot into it. Is that just because it kind of once sits there, though, and it's got the angle, or what exactly?
Yeah, right?
So, in general, when you're doing something of this size, you have to do like a hybrid approach, where you're going to take your power pruners, your head shears, and create the shape. You know, and with this particular plant, it's okay to trim the outside first, because we know what the effect is we're trying to achieve. So I can prune this roll right through it, get it cut back to where I think it's about good. Then we come back to this popping holes into it, to let some more sunlight in. So if Brent comes over with his little sprayer, and all of a sudden that day is 85 degrees, and that weed killer he just put down volatilizes, comes over, and all the growth from this plant is right on the outside of the plant, and it roasts the outside of that plant, it might kill it. But if there's both outside and inside growth, it might have a chance of recovering. It might be twisted a little bit, but it'll probably recover. So I haven't done this in a long time because my back kills me when I do it. But I've sheared this for 5 years now. And when you come onto it, just by doing this, it's nothing but stem. So come on up in here. And
It's
take a look
fluffy,
at
yeah.
it.
It's already
It's already bad.
Yeah.
So, and then when you spread it apart,
no growth.
there is like nothing in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on something like this, it's like where Brent's standing and from the street, if the outside form and shape of this looks good, we can pop this full of holes and it still looks, the shape looks maintained.
Right.
But then we've provided some horticultural benefit to the plant now. So this will trigger, boxwood and taxus will trigger new growth on old wood. So we don't have to be reserved too much about how many holes we pop in this thing. Okay? So depending on how bad it is, you're pulling out that kind of stuff. You have your garbage can right next to you as you're doing it, so there's no cleanup. You just move your can with you. And then pick out the worst offenders first. Sometimes it's a little looser, but when you find that big giant club, just take it out.
Oh, that's what you're aiming for.
It's like a rough spot
okay.
that's really stiff.
Yeah.
So for instance, say like you were saying, if Brent did spray it and it did get like fertilizer in it, and with the growth like this one has, would you be better off just cutting holes in it for it to try to get new growth, or would you be better off?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That would have to happen first.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the event of something like that, or
It gives it a chance to.
He's saying it has there's less of a chance it'll recover if it happened now.
yeah,
You've already injured the plant so much with the spray.
there's
It's
no recovery.
probably already said I'm done.
So this plant, that outside foliage is going to take the hit, so to speak. But if there's nice, and it might toast it and burn it. But the inside growth is going to take over, and you can prune off all that dead shit,
That's what I was. That's
and then let
basically
that new growth come in.
Yeah.
you know?
That's basically
So-
what I was wondering.
Yeah. So this is just a matter of reaching in, and you really can't make a mistake with this.
And you don't have to do it every year.
You don't have to do it every year. You can probably get by
2 years would be tough.
probably 2 years. So that's starting to look a little bit better, and it's just a matter of quickly just feeling. It's like, oh, that's a bad one. Take it out.
Trying to see if I can feel it. There's nothing up here.
It's all pretty bad, but that needs to be done on this whole length of his head. Some of you guys want to try this out? You got pruners? And I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the boxwood. And this one's been sheared for a couple of years now. And you can kind of see what's happening again. And you open this up, there's like almost nothing. So ideally you would be poking holes in it, something like that. And when I open this up, look at the difference between the foliage that's inside of there versus this one.
Yeah. That's how important the holes are, man.
Yeah.
This one over here looks very full.
Lot of holes.
So I could shear this in 5 minutes.
Even looking down into every single hole, there's a ton down.
And when I don't be afraid too. Taxus will respond no different than the boxwood. It's going to trigger dormant buds that are on the stem, and it will refoliate. So I can cut this back. If the size reduction was a dormant pruning objective, I can really cut this back hard. It'll look like shit till spring, and it pushes that growth out, but it's going to foliate immensely. So you could take like big, grew up in like some of the older neighborhoods where there's giant Texas Hicksai hedges. You can whack those in half. I had one that was meter Brent wide, one plant, length of a property line. We cut 6 feet on both sides, and like You know, just nothing but ugly stubs, knowing that it's going to respawn. Took 2 years, but now it's a hedge.
It's beautiful.
But that's that severe reduction type of pruning, and we did it in the wintertime.
You have to explain that to the customer, and they have to understand what's going to happen, and you have to
I was just about to
know
ask
that
you.
it's going to take its time, and you have to know a lot of other things. You can't just walk into a random person's house and take a 10-foot across hedge and go, I think this is going to look better, and hack the style out of it.
But
without
they
that
come
knowledge.
out. Free time just want to do it good now and don't really. It depends on the customer.
This is probably the one I get personally the most questions on.
These look nice and cool. Half the time you see them and they're just sticks.
Yeah.
Sticks around.
So these are hydrangea, right?
Yep.
And if you run someone's yard, are these the old-fashioned varieties that bloom on old wood, or are these the new ones that bloom on new wood? I don't freaking know. You know, so this is one of the tough ones. Unless you know the variety that you're working with. In general, if it's something's been planted in the last 5-6 years, it's going to be a reblooming type of hydrangea. So it's going to bloom on new wood and the old wood from last year. You can tell the difference between the wood.
Because of the color.
The darker is this year's, and the tan color is last year's.
Is this still alive?
So one way to, once the leaves fall off and you got the flower stems that are sitting here, basically you go down to the next little set of buds right there, and you cut off the dead flower stem, and that's deadheaded. You don't have to do anything else to these if you don't want to. If some clients like demand that they get cut back, so if you do cut them back to the ground, or this high off the ground, they're not going to bloom till November. You know, it takes so long for that new growth to come up and bloom. It takes forever. So sometimes you don't get blooms on these till October.
So if a client asks, I gotta chop this all the way down, you know,
It's like, okay, well, you might miss your flowering this year, but
this year, but next year you'll have it.
next
So,
year you'll have it. So this is kind of like spirea. Occasionally you have to knock these down just to clean out the dead wood. So when you kind of brush by these, you can kind of hear that woody.
when that cracks,
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Tell by the coloration
Yeah.
too. Usually.
so sometimes you can't, you know, but
I never thought of
you know, so when you go through like this, you can kind of hear your branches clacking, and actually it breaks off the dead ones. So you can pull them out if you want to do that. It takes a long time to do that. It's easier just to, if you're gonna clean these up, like for a reason, I would cut them about this high from the ground, and then you can hand pick all this dead stuff out of it, and it looks a lot better. You're just not gonna have the flowering until very, very late in the year. It's dead. Dead. This one's growing towards the house. That's dead. Okay, right over here too. 1, 2. I just cut off 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stubs on this. That shouldn't be there. So that branch that's right there, I think I would have just cut it right there.
Why do you use the clippers on that saw?
I would use the saw. This was dead.
I was just asking.
No, I would use the saw because I don't have the saw on.
I was just asking. I thought that maybe because this tree is different.
I mean, some
No.
some branches you could use the pruners with, because it's pretty thin enough. And it's dead sometimes, like little nubs.
I was just looking at the bark on the tree, and I'm sure it surrounds the form of the tree where you cut it at, like out there, and that's why I was putting this tree with that tree. But I was wondering why he was cutting it with that.
At least you know they're listening to you.
Yeah, at least yeah.
I know it's just me.
Neighbor's gonna come back. Like, that guy's my tree. We're on ring camera, so we're good. Yeah, no, they're probably
We got a ring camera.
They should recognize.
So by taking that one branch off, you see like where it was pruned before is only like 1.5 feet, 2 feet from the gutter. within a short period of time, that's gonna grow right back into the house. So if you can do the pruning, to let that plant kind of, it's gonna take a long time for that to reoccur. So if you can take it right down to the trunk like that, so we eliminate that, and the tree can do its thing, but just not. If you only cut it back that far, you know it's gonna just grow right back to it. So take it back, take the branch back to its origin, like we're doing here.
This tree not gonna have to, even with pruning, gonna have to come out there sooner or later. Because all your growth is basically on that side away from the house, and it's like the tree's very lopsided.
Yeah, the tree is growing towards the light, backside shaded out. And you know, going back to our design intent and our hazard, why do we prune this one right here? We got a couple more stubs there. Watch out, see if you can find it, Jim. This whole branch could probably come off to right there. Just lift it off the sidewalk, and then when you're walking underneath it, the side poke isn't going to. So these are Western arborvitae. The Western arborvitae has a much coarser foliage than that arborvitae. They're pretty tolerant of a lot of stuff. It's not standing water.
That's what gets them.
It gets almost everything.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
That plant right there is called a DeGroots spire, so it naturally stays that shape beside. This is a new variety called Junior Giant. So the typical Western arborvitae gets 50 to 60 feet tall, 10, 12 feet around. They get massive. Yeah. So the growth rate on these is supposed to be supposedly much slower. So we'll see.
The green giants, but I've been looking at
Yeah, these are, you can't get them much bigger than this yet. Won't spawn them, but they just come starting that crop, so it'll be probably, people are gonna be buying them.
hopefully they get rid of the emerald greens with these.
Yeah, that'd be nice. So, so when you're trimming these are a little bit tougher, you know. It looks like, for the most part, these are going to have a central leader to them, which is nice. And you can see on that DeGroots spire, we have 3 or 4 leaders. I mean, it's almost like a clump. Like, it's really tough to control the height on those. So, if we prune to a branch junction or drop crotch these, you know, we got to be careful. So, if I cut out the center of this right now, I will have, you can see that. If I wanted to take this out, then I'm left with 2. Both of these are going to go up.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's going to be like a double leader on it. So when you guys are like planting trees, like spruce trees, for example, and at planting time, when that tree goes into town, it's one of the things to look for. Does it already have a double leader, and should that be pruned out right now? You know, the same with your new shrubs that you're putting in. Big cross branches, broken branches, at planting time, you know, take that stuff out.
Double leaders are bad.
Yeah.
Generally on everything.
Usually because what happens is you get a really weak intersection between the two.
And then it'll split.
It starts doing this, and then one of them will have to go. So it's much easier to get rid of that when the plant is young than when it's old.
Easier height-wise too.
Yeah, height-wise too. So
I put an arb. One of the many problems with the smart guards.
and like those, see how ugly those get? It's really tough to control the height on those. But I'm going to guess, and my gut tells me that these are going to respond very well to hard pruning. So they're kind of a vigorous species. Deer don't eat them, that's why we use them.
Supposedly. Supposedly.
Supposedly, yeah, they leave them alone. Yeah,
They
leave 'em
can't
alone.
get into it.
You know, usually when you see like the regular arborvitae, anytime you see them and they're shaped like this, about this height,
Deer.
the deer have eaten them.
Yeah, they almost look pruned that way.
Yeah, and you can, in some of the neighborhoods when you drive through, you'll see that, and you know what the deer pressure is just by what's planted. Neighborhoods that have a lot of mop cypress, barberry, ornamental grass, and boxwood, and that's all you see, usually there's a huge deer problem. Because they eat everything else. You know? So western arbs are one of the better deer resistant evergreens that are narrow and columnar. Behind Jared there, remember the pediculata hydrangeas we were looking at out front? That is the tree form. It basically means it's not a standard. So I want this to be about this big, and you can see where all the cuts were made and what has happened. So like this was like 2.5 years ago, and you had the predictable 2 to 3. There's last year's cut, and look how the plant responded. So I know that this thing's going to grow out to about here this year, but that's about what I want. So, but you can kind of see, and just as you look at it, you know how the plant's going to respond, so you know how to prune it. And again, if you wanted this much tighter, you can whack this thing back as hard as you want. It's going to respond still, so you don't have to be too delicate with these.
Are the trees just as strong as the ones up front?
Yeah. Yep. When these are young, they tend to flop really bad because there's so much weight on the top. So make sure you stake them when they're young.
Does that one still need staked?
I just moved it,
Oh.
so I'll take it off in the spring. You like my hillbilly stake? The stakes are facing the direction of the
Wind.
dominant wind. So anytime we call these hillbilly stakes, we're not tri-staking, it's just one stake. So the end of that stake is pointing north and west, so that the stake is pointing into the wind basically. So the stake is stronger pointing into the wind than it is crossways, because then you're blowing the stake crossways.
I didn't ever think about that.
Yeah. But from a professional standpoint, if I came and our guys did this, I'd be pissed off, because it's like, you mean to tell me you couldn't pound these stakes in nice and straight so they're even all the way around? So when the homeowner looks at this and he sees all these weird stake angles, it looks like it fell off the truck. Or go back through and just take your handsaw and cut these off. All this wood that neatens it up a little bit. Little things make the perception makes a big difference. But anyway, these are. And the other thing too is you want there to be some sway in the plant. So you don't want that thing staked so tightly that there's no sway to the trunk. Every time that tree moves a little bit, it's strengthening that trunk. If there's no movement to the tree becomes weaker. It's like putting your arm in a cast. And what happens? You get the muscle atrophy. Same with this. So you want some sway. You don't want the wind to blow it over. And that's about how loosely it's staked. So there's some flexion to it. Just about every tree should be like that.